25 years ago, I had the great fortune to begin to learn what it means to innovate and to lead through a time of rapid technological innovation. I was early in my career, and I worked at a company called PeopleSoft. Anyone here ever heard of PeopleSoft? Yeah, it was HR software. Back in the day when you would install the software on the servers and get a database set up and get everything connected just right, and if you were lucky, you had digitized HR processes. It was pretty cool back then. It was better than faxing in your HR forms to the HR department or something. So I want to talk to you a little bit about what I learned then and what I've learned over the years about going through these technology transformations. I'll talk a little bit about what we're doing now at Autodesk as we go through this latest transformation. And then also, since we're at Autodesk University and you're all here to learn together, I'll also talk a little bit about what the academic research says about how the best companies innovate through times like we're in today. So come back with me to 2001. I applied for a job at PeopleSoft to be a security architect. I had no business being hired as a security architect back then because I was early in my career. I think that the job description said something like, you should have 10 years of experience or something. I definitely did not have that. But I understood the technology. I understood how things worked. And they gave me a chance to interview. And I remember going in there, and I interviewed with their chief security architect at the time. His name was Roger. Roger was super grumpy, very abrasive, did not smile. I just remember going in there feeling so intimidated, and I said, "Hi, Roger, nice to meet you." And he just grunted. He's like, sit down. And he grilled me on this technical interview. And I'll never forget leaving that room just feeling like there's no way I got this job. But it turns out I was the only one who actually passed his technical interview. So they took a chance on me and they gave me this job. Even though I didn't have quite the years of experience they were looking for, but they took a chance on me. And that's actually one thing that we sometimes have to do as leaders, right? We have to identify the talent, and it doesn't always come in a traditional package, 10 years of experience. I'll never forget, there's a business speaker and author named Tom Peters, and I saw him up on stage once, and he said, good leaders know how to tell the difference between someone who has 10 years of experience and someone who has 1 year of experience repeated 9 times, right? And so that's something that always stuck with me. But anyway, so they gave me a chance. And I got the opportunity to come into a company that was really innovating through this period of the web, right? And web adoption, and figuring out new ways to deliver services to customers with new technology. Now, aren't we lucky right now to be living through another time where we have the ability to reimagine how we use technology to deliver value to humanity. So, it feels like we're in another time like that right now. So, given that, how many of your companies right now are really leaning into this right now? Let me get a raise of hands. Like, you're innovating, you feel like you have a risk tolerance that is such that, your healthy experimentation is tolerated and everything. I saw a bunch of hands. Now, how many of you are in organizations that are kind of averse to the uncertainties of innovation, especially with AI right now? A few hands. Some people are willing to be honest about this. It's okay. That tells you something about the innovation narrative that's going on inside your organization, and I want to talk about that a little more in a few minutes, because it's actually an important diagnostic and an important predictor of successful growth in companies. But before that, let me get back to PeopleSoft for a second. So I joined the company, and they had this project underway where they wanted to start to deliver training to customers over the web. in the web browser, basically a virtual training environment, a virtual desktop delivered through the web browser. They already had a proof of concept set up in the lab environment, and it worked. But they encountered some issues when they tried to get it into production to really launch this thing. It just wasn't working. It wasn't connecting. So one of the first meetings I was in, I came in there, and they were really struggling to figure out why it doesn't work and how are they going to get this thing launched without delaying the project. And their network team came in and said, well, we figured out how we can make it work. All we have to do is remove the firewall. And as a security architect, I didn't love that idea. And I looked at the architectural diagrams and stuff, and I said, I think I know why it doesn't work behind the firewall. And I proceeded to explain to them that even though you're in a web browser and you think all the traffic is going over port 443, but it's really not, because there's this remote desktop connection that's happening at the network layer, and it's getting blocked because it works on a different port, et cetera, et cetera. And I said, but I also don't want to just open up this port to the whole world so that the firewall is basically open, and we leave ourselves open, our attack surface open to attack. And funny enough, like 25 plus years later, companies are still doing that, like exposing their remote desktop to the whole world. But we try not to do that because it's a bad practice. So I said we shouldn't do it this way, and I proposed something that hadn't been done before. I said, well, let's figure out how to set up a reverse proxy that will authenticate the users and then selectively decide who can connect in to our training environment over that remote desktop protocol. I thought it was a pretty smart idea. There wasn't an off-the-shelf product to do it, but I thought we could probably hack something together ourselves. And I remember there was a gentleman there in the network team named Jeremy. Jeremy was a Cisco certified internet expert, CCIE, which back then, for a young guy like me, that was like an old elder, like a wise elder, an expert in all things networking. So he wanted to talk to me and about my idea, and I went over to him, and I was like, so Jeremy, what do you think? And he says, Sebastian, that is the dumbest idea I've ever heard, and it doesn't work that way. You're not going to get it to work. This is going to fail. So I thought to myself, all right, challenge accepted. And basically, I started to work on putting together this solution. And that leads me to the first lesson here that I want to talk about, and that's really understanding the technology deeply. Because when you really, you're not just kind of tinkering on the surface, trying to figure out how to get things to work, but you really understand how they work at all the layers, and you make sure you have someone on your teams who understands how the technology works at all the layers. You can kind of predict what's going to go wrong, or at least diagnose things when they go wrong a lot quicker. Tanya was up here earlier. She was talking about how she was doing AI research before it was cool, right? She's been 20 years of AI research, publishing papers. She understands how this stuff is working from top to bottom. And in this particular situation, I was able to diagnose it because I understood what was happening at all the different layers. I think that's an important piece of the puzzle when we're innovating rapidly. So anyway, I go into the lab and I'm on this like pizza and Mountain Dew fueled, multi-day. I was staying up until 3 or 4 in the morning with one colleague of mine, and we're just trying to get this thing to work. It was really fun. And eventually we did. We got it to work. And that leads me to lesson number 2, which is when you're in this period of innovation and trying new things, you have a choice to make, right? We had to choose, are we going to get rid of the security, throw out the firewall, just make this thing work? Or are we going to let security and safety become a bottleneck and say, slow down, we need to figure out how to do this safely, and it's going to take an extra 6 months? Or do we accelerate the pace of innovation on the security side to match the pace of innovation of the business. And that's what we chose to do there, and that's what we've chosen to do here at Autodesk over the last couple of years. We're very intentional about making sure we can safely enable all of this AI innovation that we've been working on. And that means we have this internal development environments that we've set up that have the governance and the security and all that baked in. Because it's a lot safer than letting a whole bunch of development teams just go out and do their own thing in their own environments, right? Eventually, mistakes will be made, and it's just too much of an attack surface. You can't govern if everybody's doing their own thing, right? So we built this centralized environment where the governance and the security is baked in. And we recently just got that whole thing certified with ISO 42001, which is the newer ISO certification for AI. And what it does is it just allows all that security to be baked in. So that's lesson number 3, creating sandboxes for safe innovation. We have this AI development environment that's certified, and then we also created kind of safe spaces for people to try things and innovate without putting any data at risk and the ability to really create problems. So bringing that all together, I want to go back to the narratives that I was talking about earlier. So George Day is a professor at Wharton Business School. He was a professor of mine, and he wrote a book about innovation and how companies create a sustained advantage when it comes to innovation. And he defined these 3 types of growth narratives. There's the growth denying, kind of defensive, risk-averse, the growth affirming, which is the more optimistic and ambitious, and there's somewhere in between. And it's good for you to be able to kind of take the pulse of your organization so you know what you need to do to tweak it and make some changes. And the lessons of how to really, what he did was he studied lots of companies, and he said there are 3 things that the most successful companies are doing when it comes to innovation. And that is, they have the right teams, they build the right teams, they invest in talent, right? And they also, I'll skip culture for a second, I'll go up to technology. So on the technology side, they enable the teams with the tools and the technology, but they make it easy for them to do the right things, right? Like we did. We built in the governance and the security and everything so that it becomes easy to do it in the right way, compliant, et cetera, so that you're not adding a lot of friction for the teams. And then finally, the culture. You have to align incentives. I think too often in companies, we're rewarding A while hoping for B, right? And especially with innovation, sometimes we're rewarding safe bets, like set goals and make sure you meet those goals. But that's not what often happens when you're really leaning into bold innovation. You're going to fail sometimes, right? So, rewarding safety is not going to get you there. You have to really align the incentives with experimentation and learning from failure. And you have to have a bold vision for the future. And that's what we're here at AU to tell you about, our bold vision for the future. And I hope over the next few days, especially with tomorrow's keynotes, you're going to learn a lot about the bold vision that Autodesk has in mind for the future. So enjoy those, and please, if you get a chance, take our survey. My trust team is conducting this survey on the QR code. Fill it out. If you want to put your name in, you can. It can be anonymous also, but if you put your name in, you might win a prize. Thank you.